In the bustling market of Dunkura, Adjoa, a young girl with calm but piercing eyes, approached Kwesi the merchant, who was preparing for his journey to buy goods in a neighboring town. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice low but urgent. "Kwesi, don't take the road by the river today. A spirit waits in the waters. Please go another way." Kwesi scoffed, brushing her off. "You're just a child with strange ideas," he said with a dismissive laugh. Adjoa remained silent, her gaze steady as he loaded his cart and set off on the forbidden path. Hours later, a commotion erupted in the market as Kwesi staggered back, soaked and trembling, his face pale. "She was right," he gasped, shivering as he spoke to the crowd. "I crossed the river and something pulled me down. I barely escaped." The people around him exchanged looks of awe and fear. This wasn't the first time Adjoa's words had come true. Some murmured that she was blessed, others whispered that her powers were unnatural. But everyone in Dunkura knew one thing: Adjoa's visions were never wrong. As the crowd dispersed, Adjoa sat quietly under the shade of a tree, feeling both proud and unsettled. Her gift, the ability to see glimpses of the future, had been with her since she was very young. She was different from her family. Her mother didn't have the gift, nor did any of her siblings. Adjoa often felt alone, carrying a power that set her apart from others. The gift came down through her family, but only to the firstborn daughter once every third generation. Her grandmother, Nana Ifua, had been the last to possess it. Nana Ifua had explained that the power came as a blessing from the ancestors, who would reveal hidden truths about what was to come. "Your gift is a blessing," Adjoa, Nana Ifua had told her gently. "Use it wisely and always help others." But the gift wasn't easy to bear. Adjoa felt the weight of her visions deeply, especially when she saw something troubling. She couldn't keep it to herself, even when she knew people might not believe her. Dunkura's people viewed her with mixed feelings, some admiring her while others whispered that she was cursed. Yet Adjoa remained steadfast, feeling bound to share her visions, hoping they could help, even when it meant facing the unknown alone. At dawn the following day, as the first light crept over the kingdom of Dunkura, a wealthy man named Obiba arrived, his footsteps soft yet powerful. Obiba was unlike anyone the people had seen. He wore robes that shimmered, and behind him, his servants carried heavy sacks that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold. Curious eyes watched as he made his way to the palace, his arrival stirring whispers throughout the kingdom. Inside the palace, King Kwame sat on his grand throne, wondering what business this stranger could possibly have with him. Obiba entered with confidence, bowing briefly before addressing the king. He explained that he had heard tales of Dunkura's 7 ancient artifacts and their hidden powers. Obiba's eyes glinted as he spoke of the relics as artifacts of great worth and beauty. He offered to buy them for a hefty price. At first, King Kwame hesitated, for these artifacts were sacred. They had been part of Dunkura's heritage for generations, each one essential to the kingdom's well-being. The stone of the land, Asase Di, kept Dunkura's soil rich and the crops thriving, while the vessel of water, Nsuobere, ensured the rivers ran pure and full. The wind drum, Mframagu, controlled the gentle breezes and powerful winds that sustained the kingdom's climate, and the fire ring, Ogiakoro, maintained steady, life-giving fires to warm the people and their homes. The remaining artifacts, the harvest staff, Isoro Sa, staff of protection, Anigyapoma, and unity key, Ahofarikien, each offered their own unique powers. The harvest staff safeguarded abundant harvests. The staff of protection guarded Dunkura from unseen harm, and the unity key bound the people together, ensuring peace and harmony within the kingdom. Yet even with this knowledge, Kwame's greed began to outweigh his reverence. The artifacts, once honored and protected, now seemed to him only symbols of the past. His desire for wealth blurred his judgment, tempting him to overlook the artifact's vital role in Dunkura's balance. Obiba's offer was really high, and when he showed the bags of gold, the king's resolve began to waver. "How much would you pay for these Artifacts, Kwame asked, curiosity, and something more, growing in his voice. As much as they're worth to you, great king, Obiba replied, spreading his hands over the gleaming sacks of gold. The king's eyes shone with greed, and he decided to sell 3 of the relics, the wind drum, the fire ring, and the harvest staff. He reasoned that as long as he kept the most powerful ones, Dunkura would remain strong. These artifacts, he told himself, are just relics of the past. No harm will come to Dunkura. Obiba paid the king and promised to keep the artifacts safe. I must attend to business in a neighboring town, he told the king as he prepared to leave, but I will return and perhaps we can discuss the remaining artifacts. King Kwame nodded, waving a hand dismissively. You're welcome to return, Obiba, he said, a pleased smile on his face, so long as you have the price to pay for such valuable artifacts. With that, Obiba departed, leaving King Kwame counting his gold, certain he had made a wise choice. That same night, after the artifacts were secretly sold, Adjoa lay asleep in her family's small hut, the familiar sounds of Dunkura's quiet night surrounding her. But a strange heaviness filled the air, and as she drifted deeper into sleep, a powerful vision seized her, pulling her into a world of darkness and mystery. In the vision, Adjoa found herself standing alone in a thick, swirling fog, colder and darker than any night she had known. She shivered, feeling a weight in the air, as if something essential had been taken from Dunkura. Then, through the fog, she saw Prince Kofi, the only son of King Kwame, standing alone with his face pale, his breathing shallow and labored. Dark shadows wound tightly around him, wrapping around his chest as he gasped, struggling for air. As she watched in horror, Adjoa noticed strange glimmers within the shadows, faint fading lights that pulsed as though alive. She looked closer, and recognition struck her. These shadows were tied to Dunkura's ancient artifacts, the wind drum, the fire ring, and the harvest staff. In her vision, each artifact drifted farther and farther from the prince, its glow dimming with every passing second. The wind drum was silent, leaving only a chilling stillness. The fire ring's warmth had cooled to an icy blue, and the harvest staff, once filled with golden grain, crumbled to dust. Her heart pounded as she realized what this meant. The artifacts had been sold, taken away from Dunkura. The vision showed her not only their absence, but the terrible consequences that could follow. Without the artifacts, the kingdom's balance was broken, endangering the prince's life, and perhaps the entire kingdom. Adjo awoke with a start, trembling from the weight of the vision's message. Although the king had kept the sale a secret, the spirits had shown her the truth. She knew she had no choice but to warn him. Although the vision has faded, Adjoa lay wide awake in her small hut the rest of the night, her heart racing as the weight of what she'd seen pressed on her. She could still feel the darkness, the icy mist that had wrapped around Prince Kofi in her vision, and the distant glow of the missing artifacts. Though the night was calm, her mind raced, replaying every moment. She knew that the vision was real, that Dunkura's balance was broken, and that if the artifacts weren't restored, a shadow would linger over the kingdom, over the prince. When dawn finally broke, casting a faint light through the cracks of the hut, Adjoa rose with resolve. She could not keep this knowledge to herself. Her feet felt heavy as she began the journey toward the palace, her heart pounding with both determination and fear. As she approached the grand gates, the palace guards stepped in her way, their eyes questioning. "I must speak to the king," Adjoa insisted, her voice steady but pleading. "It's about Prince Kofi and the kingdom." She could see doubt flicker across their faces, but something in her gaze made them hesitate. Finally, with a nod, they stepped aside and Adjoa entered the grand hall. Inside, King Kwame sat upon his throne, looking at her with mild curiosity but clear impatience. Adjoa knelt before him, taking a deep breath. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice unwavering. "Last night I saw a vision. I saw Prince Kofi surrounded by darkness, struggling to breathe. The artifacts you sold have disturbed the kingdom's balance. Shadows cling to the prince, and they will not lift unless the artifacts are returned." King Kwame's expression darkened. He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You're just a small girl," he sneered. "Who are you to speak of balance and shadows? I brought wealth to Dunkura. I did what was wise and right." "But your majesty," Adjoa tried, her voice urgent. "Enough," the king barked, his eyes hard. "Take your nonsense and leave. Dunkura is mine to rule, and I will not be lectured by a child." Heartbroken, Adjoa rose, her head bowed. She'd done all she could, but the king's pride was like a wall keeping out the truth. As she left the palace, fear settled deep within her heart, knowing that the darkness in her vision was only just beginning. Returning to their small hut, Adjoa's heart was heavy with worry. She had spoken to King Kwame, but his pride had blinded him to her warning. She knew that time was running out, yet she felt powerless. The vision had been so strong, so clear, she knew Dunkura was in danger. Word of Adjoa's visit to the palace soon spread, reaching the ears of Queen Abena, the Queen Mother. Queen Abena had always believed in the old ways and respected the power of the ancient artifacts. She sensed that Adjoa's warning held truth and sent a messenger to bring the girl to her in secret. When they met, Adjoa carefully shared her vision with the Queen Mother, describing the shadows around Prince Kofi, the fading glow of the missing artifacts, and the danger that loomed over Dunkura. Queen Abena listened in silence, her face growing grave. She believed every word and understood what the king did not, that the kingdom's balance was fragile and that the artifacts were more than symbols. They were Dunkura's life force. The Queen Mother thanked Adjoa sincerely, and before they parted, she whispered, "If anything strange happens to the prince, I will perform the rite of the ancestors as you have shown me. The spirits may yet protect him." With a heavy heart, Adjoa returned home, hoping that Queen Abena's belief would help stave off the danger her vision had foretold. A few days later, Dunkura prepared for a grand celebration, a tradition held whenever a prince came of age. This ceremony marked Prince Kofi's passage into adulthood, a day of honor and joy for the kingdom. The palace was filled with music, dancing, and feasting, and the kingdom people gathered in colorful attire to witness the event. As the celebration reached its peak, something strange happened. In the middle of the ceremony, Prince Kofi suddenly stumbled, clutching his chest as his face turned pale. He struggled to breathe, gasping as if an invisible force was squeezing the life from him. Panic spread through the crowd, and the musicians fell silent. King Kwame stood frozen, helpless as he watched his only son, the heir to his throne, struggling to breathe. The color drained from the king's face as he witnessed Kofi's pain, his heart pounding with a mix of terror and desperation. He wanted to help, to do something, but he felt powerless, struck by the fear that he might lose his son in front of the entire kingdom. But Abena, the Queen Mother, acted swiftly. Remembering what Adjoa had taught her, she performed the rite of the ancestors, offering a sacred chant and sprinkling herbs near the prince. As she completed the ritual, the shadows around him seemed to lift, and he took a shaky, deep breath. Prince Kofi's life had been saved, but only just. Though he escaped death, he was left weak and bedridden, barely able to move for the next few days. The people whispered of curses and shadows, and Queen Abena felt the weight of Adjoa's warning more than ever. She knew that Dunkura's troubles were far from over. After Prince Kofi's near death at his coming-of-age ceremony, King Kwame was gripped by anger and frustration. The joy of his son's celebration had turned into a nightmare, witnessed by the entire kingdom. Instead of accepting the incident as a consequence of selling the artifacts, he directed his fury toward Adjoa, the girl who had warned him of the very danger that had almost claimed his son's life. In his mind, Adjoa's words echoed like a curse, haunting him with each flash of his son's pale face. He refused to believe that her vision had been a warning, convinced instead that she had somehow caused Prince Kofi's collapse. Her message, once dismissed, now seemed like an omen, one he believed she had set into motion herself. To him, she was not a seer, but a girl who had meddled with dark forces. Unable to see his own role in the kingdom's imbalance, King Kwame's anger turned into a need for revenge. "Bring her to me," he commanded his guards, his voice trembling with fury. "She has cursed my son and must face punishment." Word of the king's order swept through Dunkura, filling the people with dread. They whispered about Adjoa, uncertain of what to believe. Some feared her, thinking she wielded powers beyond their understanding. Others, who had witnessed her kindness and gift, knew she had only tried to help. Yet no one dared speak against the king's orders. As the guards set out to capture Adjoa, a heavy tension settled over Dunkura. The people watched in silence, knowing that the girl who had foreseen the prince's danger would soon face the king's wrath. When Adjoa arrived at the palace, she was led into the grand throne room, her heart pounding. King Kwame sat before her, his face twisted with anger. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, someone who had brought nothing but trouble to his family. "You," he thundered, "you've cast dark magic upon my son, bringing shadows upon the royal family. Your curse nearly killed him." Adjoa's heart broke. "Your Majesty, it was only a vision, a warning," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I never cast any curse. I only wanted to help." But the king's anger only grew. His pride blinded him to the truth, and he refused to listen. Ignoring her desperate pleas, he declared, "You will be sentenced to death, and only then will Dunkura be rid of this darkness." Abena, the queen mother, stepped forward, her face full of sorrow. "She meant no harm, Kwame," she protested, but the king would not be swayed. Adjoa's heart sank as she realized she would pay the price for the king's greed, and the true danger to Dunkura was only beginning. Queen Abena watched with a heavy heart as Adjoa was taken away, her wrists bound, her eyes filled with sorrow. Deep down, Queen Abena knew that the girl's warning had been true. She feared that the king's decision to silence Adjoa would only invite more darkness into Dunkura, placing the kingdom and her son in even greater danger. Quietly, Queen Abena made a promise to herself. She would seek the truth of Adjoa's words and do whatever was necessary to restore balance to Dunkura, even if it meant going against the king's wishes. That night, when the palace was silent, she gathered sacred herbs, whispered ancient prayers, and called upon the ancestors for guidance. As she placed each offering before the altar, she felt a powerful resolve. She vowed to protect Dunkura and Prince Kofi, no matter what it took. Locked away in her dark cell, Adjoa sat in silence, her thoughts heavy with the vision that had led her here. She whispered a prayer to the ancestors, asking them to protect Dunkura and lift the shadows that clung to Prince Kofi. Though her fate was uncertain, she took comfort in knowing she had tried to help her kingdom. The next morning, Dunkura's usual calm was shattered by an unsettling phenomenon. The people awoke to an intense, unnatural heat even before the sun had fully risen. As the morning stretched on, the temperature continued to rise. By noon, the heat was so oppressive that the air seemed to ripple, and everything in sight took on a distorted, wavering appearance. The people of Dunkura, drenched in sweat and struggling to breathe, gathered in the shade, whispering about the unnatural heat. Elders muttered that the spirits were displeased, and some cast uneasy glances toward the palace. But King Kwame, in his cool, shaded chambers, ignored their murmurs. He scoffed at the villagers' fears, choosing to remain blind to the strange signs gripping his kingdom. Meanwhile, in her cell, Adjoa sensed the land's suffering and knew the imbalance was only growing more severe. In the days that followed, Dunkura fell deeper into a shadow of despair. The once vibrant fields turned brittle as crops withered, their green leaves fading to a sickly yellow. The river, a lifeline for Dunkura's people, receded to a mere trickle, its banks dry and cracked. Sickness began to spread through the kingdoms, and the people's faces grew pale with hunger and fear. Whispers of Adjoa's prophecy filled the air as people began to wonder if her words had been true after all. But King Kwame remained blind to his people's suffering, unwilling to admit that his decision to sell the artifacts might be the cause of Dunkura's misfortune. He clung to his wealth, believing it more valuable than anything for the well-being of his kingdom. As the people grew restless, their trust in the king began to waver. Queen Abena felt the weight of Dunkura's sorrow pressing on her heart. She watched the people grow weaker each day, knowing time was running out. The balance of Dunkura's life force had been broken, and only the return of the artifacts could restore it. She knew that the kingdom's survival depended on convincing the king, but she would have to tread carefully. Yet with each passing day, her determination grew. She understood that saving Dunkura might mean defying the king himself. The day of Adjoa's execution loomed closer, casting a shadow over her spirit, though she tried to keep her heart steady. In the stillness of her prison cell, she knelt down, resting her hands on the cold stone floor, and closed her eyes. She whispered a final prayer, a plea for Dunkura, hoping the ancestors would hear her cry and have mercy on the kingdom. "Protect the people. Save the prince," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She prayed not for herself, but for her homeland, for the people whose lives had been made harder since the artifacts had been sold. The winds had spoken to her spirit, and she sensed that Dunkura's struggles were far from over, that her journey might continue in ways she couldn't yet understand. Adjoa listened to the whispers of the spirits, letting their words give her strength. She knew she had done all she could, but she also felt a strange, deep calm settle within her heart. Her fate was uncertain, but she felt the ancestors' presence close, as if they were preparing her for something beyond even her own visions. Dunkura's suffering continued to worsen, and the signs of imbalance grew more severe. Crops continued to fail, and each day the river shrank further, leaving the kingdom desperate for water. A sense of helplessness spread through Dunkura, and the people began to cry out for change. Sensing the kingdom's desperation, Queen Abena quietly gathered the elders of Dunkura in secret. She spoke to them in a low voice, sharing her fears about the lost artifacts and the king's reckless decisions. She reminded them of the power of the ancient artifacts and how Dunkura's balance had always depended on them. "The kingdom's survival is in our hands," she urged, her voice steady. "If the king will not restore the artifacts, we must find another way." The elders listened, their faces grave but resolute. They had seen the suffering in their people's eyes and knew Queen Abena spoke the truth. United in purpose, they made a silent pact to restore Dunkura's balance, with or without the king's support. As they left, they knew that their path would be difficult, but it was a path they could no longer avoid. The day of Adjoa's execution dawned, but the sun was nowhere to be seen. A thick blanket of clouds covered Dunkura, casting an eerie, unnatural darkness over the entire kingdom. The people gathered in silence, their faces etched with fear and sorrow as they sensed that something terrible was about to unfold. The air was heavy and cold, as if the kingdom itself was mourning. A deep silence settled over Dunkura, broken only by the shuffling of feet as people assembled in the square. They looked around uneasily, feeling the chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Even the birds and animals had gone quiet, sensing the unnatural stillness that had taken hold. Whispers spread among the crowd, with many wondering if Dunkura's suffering would end or if it would only worsen after Adjoa's execution. From her place on the palace balcony, Queen Abena looked out over the crowd, her heart heavy with sorrow. Her gaze fell upon Adjoa, bound and silent, her expression calm despite the fate that awaited her. In her soul, Queen Abena felt the weight of impending disaster. She knew that the darkness enveloping Dunkura would only grow, that the kingdom's balance had been shattered. Yet her pleas to King Kwame had gone unheard, leaving her helpless as the kingdom teetered on the edge of ruin. As the guards led Adjoa toward the place of execution, the sky seemed to grow even darker, almost pitch black, as if night itself had fallen upon the day. The people held their breath, their eyes wide with dread, watching as Adjoa was brought forward. Queen Abena clenched her hands, hoping against hope that something, anything, would stop this terrible act.